Let's learn how to pick out fabrics for the 1840s. Hi everyone, my name is Caitlin, and on this channel I teach old-fashioned sewing skills and we copy originals. We are starting a new series where we deep dive into each decade starting with the 19th century. We'll see where we go from there. And there are decades of the 19th century that I don't do, but we are starting with the 1840s. So last month we dove into primary sources of the 1840s and where to find them, and then this month we're going to dive into how to pick fabrics for the 1840s, which I think should be a fun one. So I no longer work in the museum setting, but I have been doing living history for 12 plus years and then in sewing for about 20 plus years. But I do keep a small collection of originals, and I have friends who have originals that they've collected, so I do try to share documented, historically accurate techniques with you. If you're a returning viewer, thank you so much for coming back, and if you're new here, hi, welcome, glad you're here. I am doing this mostly for the benefit of a female living historian or someone who dresses up and puts on the persona of a person in a particular time period and place in order to educate the public about historic life. So I do heavily focus on the American South because I am in Texas, but I do try to encompass at least the U.S. in my research and note any changes or trends I notice within a particular area. So when we start to look at fabrics for the 1840s, you'll notice very quickly there aren't a lot of options in terms of fiber. We only have natural fibers in this time period. And we got into this a little bit more when I did a podcast episode on natural dyeing, and we dove into an 1815 dye manual. But natural fibers are split into two categories when it comes to dyeing them different colors. Protein fibers take dyes very well. They become very vibrant and often very vivid colors. They are more saturated and richer. And then there's plant-based fibers, which are typically a little bit more dull, softer, not quite as rich as protein fibers. So when we're looking for fabrics, particularly for dresses and outerwear, we need to not only document the shade of fabric to the time period, but also to the type of fabric that we're trying to emulate. Because there are colors that show up in the 1840s and silks and wools that are just not achievable in cottons, or at least don't show up in cotton. So when we're looking for fabrics, we need to make sure that we are not only documenting the color, but also documenting that color to the specific fiber. So in addition to noting fiber and shade of fabric, we also need to be aware that not all fabrics are appropriate for all circumstances. So there are fabrics that you see in quilts or even in infants' clothing or children's clothing, but those same types of designs may not show up in women's clothing. Some styles of dress or outfit are only appropriate in certain fabrics and fibers. It's a bit foreign to us now, but we do have to look beyond, can I document this fabric to the 1840s, but also make sure we're documenting the fiber to the design or pattern of the fabric, and also the type of garment that the fabric was made into. So there are a lot of facets just to be aware of when we are picking fabrics. Some fabrics are specifically designed for dress goods, and others were not meant for dress goods, and we'll get into that in a moment. So I think for ease of understanding, we're going to talk about underpinnings separately, and then corsets, dresses, outerwear, and then within each of those categories, we'll list the fibers and the weaves that we see in the 1840s. So we're going to start with underpinnings. For clarity's sake, let's start with body linen, such as chemises, drawers, and petticoats, and nightdresses. So the most common fabric for these types of garments in the 1840s is going to be something called longcloth, which unfortunately is no longer being made. So most people agree that the most similar fabric to longcloth is Pimatex cotton or Pima cotton, which you can buy from like Dharma Trading. That's my favorite source for it. The texture is smoother than period longcloth that I have examined, which has the appearance of linen in the terms of it has some slubs or raised bits on the fabric surface, although the slubs are a lot finer than linen and spaced further apart than linen. And speaking of linen, we do see in the 1840s chemises, drawers, and nightdresses made of linen as well. Again, this would be bleached linen. You can also get cotton linen blends if you wanted that as well. So cotton was cheaper, at least here in America, and some places easier to get a hold of, and it was also warmer. Linen is cooler to wear, and it wicks moisture away from the body when you sweat, which is very comfortable to wear. Now, if you want to go with cotton, but you can't afford Pimatex, which is totally understandable because it's not quite like period long cloth anyway, and it can be harder to justify the price. Just any regular premium bleached muslin will work just as well. You want something opaque, or as opaque as you can get it. And bleached, of course. The only reference I have for unbleached underclothes would be for enslaved infants' clothing and also for chemises and shirts sent to the mission field for like local children. So unless you are an enslaved infant or a person attending an English school in India, stick to bleached cotton. I have found 2 references for flannel night dresses in the 1840s. Now, quick soapbox, because it really grates my nerves when people use cotton flannel for mid-19th century reproductions. Cotton flannel did not exist, at least not as we know it. Well, canton flannel, which is a cotton flannel, did exist, but canton flannel is twill on one side and then the raised flannel bits on the underside. That existed, but true cotton flannel, as we see today, was not a thing. So please stop using cotton flannel for your mid-19th century reproduction. It was not a fabric. If you see the word flannel in the period, it meant wool flannel. They will specify canton flannel if it meant canton flannel, but if you just see the word flannel, it means wool. Drawers can also be made of flannel, but I have looked and have not found a reference for flannel chemises, which does make sense because that goes underneath the corset, and flannel can add a little bit of a bulk, especially if it's canton flannel, which is a thicker fabric, so that does actually make sense. But if desired, you can make flannel drawers and night dresses as long as it is canton flannel. Petticoats. Oh gosh, there's so many variety of petticoats. Long cloth, or again the bleached cotton petticoats, would be the most common. You can go back and just listen to my spiel on what you need to look for in terms of a white bleached cotton. For your primary petticoat, you could do a bleached cotton, or if it's very cold, you could do a wool flannel petticoat. Quilted petticoats are also a thing, and I have seen these quilted with silk or with wool fabric, and then occasionally lined in cotton, sometimes lined in other fibers. I have not found an outer cotton quilted petticoat yet. That I have not looked for. And honestly, it makes sense. If you're going to go through all that work, remember this is really before sewing machines took off, so most things are going to be hand sewn in the 1840s. And if you look at the quilting designs, they're very intricate. If you're going to put that much effort into a quilted petticoat, you want it to be warm. Protein fibers are a lot warmer than plant-based fibers, so a silk or wool makes you feel warmer. If you're going to put all that work into it, you might as well make it something that's actually going to help you. The batting that could be used, they had cotton batting, they had wool batting. Again, personally, if I'm going to go through all that trouble of hand stitching a quilted petticoat, I'm going to use a wool batting just because it's going to be warmer and therefore more useful. For skirt supports, or to make your skirt stand out, this is before the crinoline, or the cage crinoline as we like to call it today. Skirt supports are completely optional. You don't have to wear them, but they work really well for like upper or middle class impressions, something where you want a little bit more of a shape. So corded petticoats are a thing in the 1840s. Now, the people in the 1840s had the absolute fortune to be able to walk into their dress goods store and buy a length of pre-corded fabric where the cords are woven right into the cloth. Then they just had to buy how much they needed and then cut it up and sew it like a regular petticoat. It was so easy for them, and it did not take a lot of time. Now, we don't have that option. We have to stitch rows and rows and rows and rows of cording all the way around a petticoat. And it really takes a long time. I hate making corded petticoats. It's like if there's one thing I actually hate more than anything, it's making corded petticoats. I hate them so much. Now, sewing the cords into the petticoat is a period correct option. I have seen petticoats where the cords were sewn in. So it is period correct. It's just very rare, and honestly it makes a lot of sense because that is a lot of work when you just go to the store and buy a length of pre-corded fabric. I'm guessing in some areas they may not have that option available, and so they did sew the cords in, but oh my goodness, that's a lot of work. And these cords are not wide. I know a lot of people today like to make a very thick cord into their corded petticoats, or like a rope. That would not be appropriate. You're wanting something that is like yarn weight. So like a fingering, or what is the next size up? DK, a sport width of yarn. Something that's no more than 3/8 of an inch in diameter is what you're looking for. Typically it's more 1/8 to 1/4 inch diameter. So it takes a lot of them to go up a petticoat, even if you're only going to like knee length with those cords. Another option in the period would be a horsehair petticoat called a crinoline, not to be confused with like a hoop skirt crinoline of the 1850s and 1860s. I will not lie and say that I have not looked into buying horsehair to be able to spin and weave my own 19th century horsehair petticoat, because yes, I am that crazy and I would do something like that. I'm just not entirely sure how it would spin. I mean, I was sold, this is Bridget, she's my 1850s spinning wheel, and she was sold with this, but the guy who sold it to me was like, oh, don't forget your thing of horsehair, as he handed it to me. This is her distaff. This is flax, this is not horsehair. I've not figured out how to spin flax. It requires skill that I do not currently possess. But I'm wondering if I do figure out how to spin flax, if maybe spinning horsehair is like the same thing. And if I do get to that point, then perhaps I might actually make myself a horsehair petticoat one day. It's on my list of things to try just for kicks one day. Alright, for your outermost petticoat, you have a couple of options. So option 1 is to make basically a long cloth white dress looking petticoat. So basically there's an attached bodice with an open neckline and usually short sleeves. This isn't a dress, it's just a bodice petticoat, something kind of left over from the Regency period. Sometimes you do see the bodice petticoats there as well. It's the same thing. You can also just have your outermost petticoat as a regular old just skirted petticoat without a bodice. The skirt petticoats can be made of long cloth, or they can be made up of an old dress. Most often wool, which by the way, if you're doing any type of manual labor that revolves around a fire, so like cooking, laundry, basically anything that revolves around a fire, I highly recommend a wool petticoat. Wool is both water resistant and also flame resistant, and so it is a lot safer to be around a fire when you're wearing wool. You will not get burned as easily. And also your petticoats are shorter than your dress, and so when you pin up your skirt, as you should be doing for work, you have that extra leg room to really move your feet, because your petticoats usually go up a little bit above your ankle, so there's more moving room. And all that means is just when you're cleaning or hauling water or scrubbing floors, you won't be weighed down by soaked skirts. Like cotton and linen will just soak up that moisture. Wool will not. And also, if you get too close to a fire, your petticoat is going to smolder at best and not catch, which is very safe. So for safety, in hard-wearing petticoats, choose wool for working wear. If you're not doing working wear, just disregard all that. You can just wear a regular white cotton petticoat. That's fine. And now for corsets. So most often I see corsets in the 1840s in cotton, either a plain weave similar to Pimatex, actually closer to Pimatex than I think actually closer to Pimatex than long cloth is, or sateen, or even a twill. Now I know cotton coutil is super common among living historians for their corsetry, which makes sense. It's nice and thick, but it's still lightweight, and the bones don't poke through, and it's pretty looking. Like, I understand the reasons that we use coutil. I have yet to find a single American source for coutil on corsetry. I can find references to French corsets in coutil, so like actual French references. They were in French. And I found at least one place where they were selling French corsets in England, and they mentioned they were made of coutil. So if you're English, you might be able to get away with a coutil corset. If you're American in the 1840s, I'm going to say right now, my current research is going, no, we don't use coutil. We're going to stick with a plain weave or a twill or a sateen. You see 1840s corsets most often in white. Occasionally you'll see them in a different color. I've seen a blue corset. I've seen several tan ones. I've seen some brown ones. If you choose the white, I've seen a couple of corsets where they do the cording rows when they're sewing the cording in or sewing the boning channels. They do that in a contrast color thread to kind of give it a pop of color. It seems like a lot of work to me, but okay. It produces a really lovely effect. So I've seen that done in blue. I think I've seen it done in pink, if I remember correctly. Just very light colors like that. Let's talk about dressers and wrappers now, right? Which is the fun part, right? So linen is going to be very much out of fashion by this time. It wrinkles very easily, and then once it's washed and worn a lot, I don't know how to describe it, like an undesirable drape to it, and it's so soft. So outside of traveling dresses, you really don't see a lot of references to linen. I have seen 1830s dresses in linen. I've seen like 2 though, so it's not very popular. It's just vanishingly rare to non-existent. So let's go back to the fibers you do see in women's dresses in the 1840s. So the name of the game in the 1840s is loud and proud. We will see some absolutely wild prints in this time period. Common color combinations would be like brown and blue or brown and green, somewhere in there. Let's start with looking at period cotton dresses. So cotton dresses and wrappers are going to be made of a printed or woven design fabric, by which I mean you do not see solid colored cotton dresses. I have a myth-busting video as to why, and in that there's an 1842 quote about how cotton fabrics for ladies' dresses and also for upholstery are not dyed a uniform solid color, but instead are ornamented in all sorts of manners of prints and designs. I will link that myth-busting video above for you. So along with no solid colored cotton dresses, we are left with plaids, stripes, and prints. Cotton dress prints seem to be broken down into 2 categories, like super simple or deceivingly complex is what I like to term them as. So the super simple prints are going to be in the very minority. They'll have 2 to 3 colors in them, and for some reason I find this style of fabric most often in yellow, or in ginghams, which would make sense. That would only have 2 colors. Gingham was a catch-all term for basically any type of very basic plaid, including what we would call gingham today, which would be that very small checked fabric. I have seen 1840s dresses of gingham or basic plaid in 1/4 inch squares, and I've seen them up to about 1 inch wide squares, maybe a little bit above. It's an online image, and I'm looking at it going, okay, it looks like 1 inch, maybe 1 1/4 inches. The prints again usually have very few colors, 2, mostly if you don't count white as a color, which Victorians did not. Very subtle prints, and even the colors themselves are not settled. And then we have the deceivingly complex, by which I mean at first glance you go, oh, okay, that's a little weird, but pretty simple. But as you look closer, the fabrics just have more and more detail to them. So let's take this early 1840s cotton gown. At first glance, you see lovely floral motifs, quite large and very much spaced apart. And then I get to a close-up. Yes, there are large floral motifs close up, but there's also a black design in the form of a stripe, but it's not a stripe. It is two little vertical lines and then two little horizontal lines going up and up and up to make it look like a stripe, even though it's not actually a stripe. And then you look even closer, there's webbing or lightning strikes, as I like to call it, just designed all the way through the fabric's ground. So good luck finding a close approximation of that in today's fabrics. Even our reproduction fabric doesn't typically have that many design elements in a single fabric, because we today like things simpler, and that was not necessarily the case in the 1840s. You can find some really great prints, but they don't have the complexity that the originals had. It's very hard to find a pureed complex design when we look at fabrics today. Our modernized like cleaner, simpler designs, so our fabric companies are catering to that, catering to the people they know will buy their fabric. But again, that's just not what you see in the 1840s. So here's another seemingly simple stripe. But no, you get close up and there's at least 6 colors in this fabric, besides the cream or the white ground. Those tiny little orange stripes are actually not just orange. It's a brown thread, an orange thread, and a yellow thread to make that one stripe. And then plus there's a green and then a different lighter brown for in between the stripes, and then the purple stripes. The simplest one I found was an all-over paisley dress in yellow, but look how much detail and shading there is in the leaves and flowers. And this is a printed fabric done with block print, because you can see some of the white spaces where the colors didn't cover everything completely. And then here's another deceptively simple fabric in white and purple, except when you zoom in, yes, it is only 3, possibly 4 colors. I can't quite tell if it's fading or 2 different shades of purple there. But there are stripes. One of the stripes is a floral pattern with a dotted background, and then in between the floral pattern is a mini stripe in white and purple with random black dots and random geometric purple open square things. I don't know what you would call those. Even the plaids are deceiving. Oh look, a pretty white and blue plaid. Nope, that is embroidered in green and brown and alternating stripes going up the fabric. And look, a little dotted pink dress. Nope, that is a pink ground, and I believe what's called cinnamon pink, with a palmetto fan shaped design in equal intervals that are then turned different directions for visual effect, because we can't have everything going up the same direction. It has to be visually effective. And then there's this, what honestly looks like the 1990s trend of sponging the walls. It looks like that on the fabric background between the palmetto fans. It is very hard to find a good 1840s reproduction print because none of our fabrics have the detail that you see in originals. There may be some Indian block prints that could get close to the 2 yellow dresses, but it would still be difficult to get the scale, shade, fabric weight, and drape and design all perfect. Another 1840s option that I have seen, at least for young ladies, would be like a dotted Swiss or a Swiss dot. This one has pink dots. The dots have to be sewn on, not glued, so they're like little raised polka dots almost. They're sewn in dots and not the glued on ones. And then for a period Swiss dot, at least in my experience, the dots are a little bit larger than we see in modern Swiss dot, and they're further apart than what we see in modern Swiss dot. But you could probably get by with that one. It's really close. So now let's talk protein fibers, starting with wool. So you get some great printed cotton nowadays that were really in the period wool designs. When most fabric designers design fabric, they are looking at pictures, or even if they are handling them, they don't know what a period wool feels like and often mistake it for cotton. Also, most of these people are not interested in making authentic reproduction fabrics. They're mostly catering to quilters who in general prefer to quilt with cotton, not wool. So they want fabrics that look period but in cotton, even if the fabrics were originally in wool. This creates a conundrum for the modern living historian, because if we don't use them, A, we are severely limiting the quality and the quantity of period appropriate cottons. We're not showing the designs that were readily available in the mid-19th century. And B, we're missing a whole lot of variety in our clothing and the colors and prints that we can get if we just use appropriate for cotton reproduction prints. And I think most living historians have to make that decision for themselves about what they're going to do. I have met people who are like, no, this fabric would have been wool and it's not cotton, so I will not use it because it is cotton and that should be wool. And I've also met people who are like, yes, this fabric would have been a wool, but period wools are the weight of a modern quilting cotton. So I can take this cotton and make it up as a wool dress and just tell everyone that it's wool when I'm in character or when I'm out of character, saying this is cotton, but this is what a period dress weight wool would feel like. It's about this weight, it's about this thickness. So it's an approximation of period dress weight wool. And that way I can at least display a variety of fabric that was available back then, but would otherwise be missing from the visual representation of living history. And I fall in and out of these two camps. I go back and forth between them. Some years I fall more on one side than the other. I think both are very valid points. In the 1840s, I don't see it as big of a deal, as we're not in the era yet where cotton dresses are generally made far different styles than wool and silk gowns. The style of gown doesn't really depend on the fiber in the 1840s, so it's easier to get away with. The only thing I see different in most 1840 wooled gowns as opposed to cotton is that the wool gowns are more apt to have a contrast trim, whereas nearly all the cotton dresses either are not trimmed or are trimmed in self fabric. So the fabric that's made of the dress is also made the trim, so like a ruffle or something. And this makes sense when you think about period laundry practices. Wool does not get washed, and therefore trim isn't as big of a deal because trim often cannot be washed. It's usually either silk or wool, so it's not generally washable. Sometimes the colors will bleed into the fabric behind it. So generally, if you're going to wash something and you have a trim, you have to take the trim off to wash it and then put the trim back on, which is a lot of work. So generally, you don't see that in cotton. You see it in silks and wools that are not washed. They are spot cleaned as needed. So cotton, again, is washed. You want to make sure that whatever you decorate it with is also washable. Hence the commonality of no trim on cotton dresses, or at least self-fabric trim. So let's look at some wool period dresses. Overarching themes are, again, big and bold, and they really liked serpentine prints in the 1840s, and also ombre effects, ombre effects in the fabric, which is a huge thing about 5 years ago. I don't know, something about the late 20-teens or early 2020s, everyone's really into the ombre effect for a while, and it's just hilarious to me that it was considered the new trendy thing, and it was totally a thing in the 1840s. I find it hilarious. So this first print is a brownish purple and green as its overarching colors. It's a serpentine print with a white floral design on a green background and one stripe, and then an ombre stripe with swirls around the edges and middle. Again, it's a lot of detail in this fabric design. I absolutely love it. I love the 1840s and their crazy fabrics. So here's another deceptively simple print. It's just a brown and black window pane, right? Wrong. Yes, that is a more watered look in the brown in between the plaid. And then here's a typical 1840s stripe, a floral stripe with a narrow contrasting stripe in several layers. That has a red, a blue, and then a paisley within a second stripe, which all go together comprise about a width of that floral stripe. You'll see that a lot in 1840s stripes. They're even, but they're not. Sometimes several stripes together will make the width of the second stripe. So it's kind of even, but also not, if that makes sense. And this one's one of my favorites. I wish this whole dress survived and not just the pelouring, because it's wonderful. Just look at that beautiful dark blue background, and then the electric blue stripe, which is just perfection. And then the lattice work green with little red and yellow leaves. Just look at it. It's beautiful. And I'm sure you've noticed it, but you haven't been paying attention about how much more vibrant and vivid the shades on the wools are as opposed to the cottons. That's another reason it's hard to use modern cottons as period cottons. The shades in modern reproduction quilting cottons are often more akin to period wool shades than they are to period cotton shades. This is another one that looks really busy, but it has just enough to control the chaos. So if you look at the whole dress, then you get a close-up of the fabric and you just realize how many tiny designs make up this whole pattern. It's just insane. And this one I could not find a close-up of the fabric, but you can see the florals, but also what I like to call it the coral effect in between them. And here's another wool print with the ombre effect, this time in blue. I love this fabric. It's a stripe with the ombre going at that angle. It looks totally like an off-kilter plaid. It's very modern, but I also don't see that stuff in modern fabrics. I think it's awesome. And then here's an all-over chaos wool print. This is one of my favorite 1840s wool fabric. I am a sucker for the 1840s and 1830s black floral wool prints. I think they're great. There's my all-time favorite wool fabric ever is an 1830s print that's kind of similar to this one. It's a floral, kind of a serpentine stripe, but it's floral with a black background. I'm just a sucker for black backgrounds with the wool. I think it looks great. But here we have a dark gray background with the with the stripe, horizontal stripe, and then also bright, bold red roses and green leaves. So yes, I leave it up to the individual person on whether they will use reproduction cotton prints and just make them up as a wool. I find it super simple to tell people, yes, well, my dress is actually cotton because that's all we can get nowadays. But in the 19th century, this print would have been in wool. But wool feels very similar to this reproduction cotton. It has the same feel to it, as in it's very soft. A period wool it's going to be a little bit lighter than a quilting cotton, and the fibers are going to be a little bit further apart. It's not going to be quite as dense, but otherwise it's a very close approximation to what period wool would feel like. And then that educates people while also acknowledging what is wrong with my dress fabric. And before I forget, wools can be solid colors as well. There are just too many cool prints, so I didn't get to, post any of the plain ones. But yes, wools do come in solid colors. And now silk dresses. Silks can come in solids, prints, plaids, stripes, or embroidered designs, and any combination of the above. So let's start off with a stripe. Again, this is one main stripe and then a secondary stripe, which is several stripes made up to be about the same width as the first one. This is called a shot silk in the period, sometimes known today as iridescent or changeable silk. Basically, you put one color on the loom and then you weave with another color. And in silk especially, you get this iridescent effect where you have people telling you things like, oh, that fabric can't be period because they couldn't do an effect like that back then, without realizing how stupidly simple this design is. I'm telling you, humans are like naturally curious and we do stupid stuff all the time. So it's like, it probably took humans 2 seconds after figuring out how weaving works to go, ooh, I wonder what would happen if we put one color this way and one color this way and see what happens. And they discovered shot silk. I've seen medieval paintings with like clearly iridescent silk fabrics. So it's been a thing for a while. And here's another shot silk. This one is green and gold. And yes, that might actually be arsenic green. It's hard to tell because you get that tiny little dot of green, but it's close to the shade of arsenic green, so it's possible. And no, not every green in the period was dyed with arsenic. I have people who like to tell me that it was, but no. I have studied period dye manuals. I know the other ways to get green. There are other ways to get green other than just arsenic. Drives me nuts when I wear a regular old green dress and get told, oh, that would have been dyed with arsenic back then, because no, it wasn't. There is a very specific shade of green that is arsenic green. Arsenic green is somewhere between a sea green and an apple green is basically what I've determined is arsenic green looks like. So anything that's darker than that is not going to be dyed with arsenic. All right, moving on. So here's a deceptively simple black silk dress with embroidered silk flowers, except that background isn't solid, it's a brocade. And this one, I don't have a close-up of it either, but shot silks could also be brocade. This one looks like it's pink and green. And this silk has little itty-bitty little tiny stripes between the embroidered flowers. And then here's a normal stripe. So notice how large scale the prints seem to be. We're still in that big and bold pattern and print phase left over from the 1830s. It kind of does stick around for a while, especially as the dresses get bigger and the crinolines start coming out and dresses get fuller and fuller and fuller. You really need a larger scale to be able to carry that, to make it look nice and all put together. Putting a very tiny print on a huge dress, the print gets swallowed up. It does end up making it look like it's a solid fabric. So a lot of the tiny little prints weren't not being made up as adult women's dresses. You see those smaller prints being used in children's dresses where the scale is smaller. But for women's dresses, you tend to see a very large scaled fabric. And that is something I see people doing wrong a lot, is picking some very small, very scrolly floral type designs for the reproduction dresses. Yes, you see some smaller designs and fabrics in originals, but most of them should be big and bold. And it throws off the historic vibe if you walk into a 1840s event and 9 out of 10 have the smaller scale prints that are more appealing to our eyes, because we see the big fabrics and they kind of scare us a little bit. We like the smaller, more controlled designs, and that's just not what was popular back then. So here's a plaid that utilizes the shot effect in some areas. I love the electric blue. Again, I love electric blue. I think it's hilarious because people often don't think that it's possible in natural dyes. It is completely possible in natural dyes in protein fibers. I've only seen it in silk and wool. I've not seen electric blue in cotton. But if you have silk or wool, electric blue is totally possible in a natural dye. It's completely possible, and I love it. And honestly, we could be here forever just picking apart original fabrics, and I wish we had time to just continue to go through fabrics and get the close-ups, but we would be here forever. So I'm hoping this helps some people pick out some fabric designs for the 1840s. I know it's really hard to look at prints and be able to date them, but really The trick is, and it's not really a trick, it's just to look at originals over and over and over and over again so you get to feel what you're looking for. And don't just look at the very basics, just actually go in and look as close as you can get. And eventually you'll get to the point where you look at reproduction modern fabrics. You can go, okay, this one's good, this one's okay, this one's nice, but those color shades would have been in wool, not cotton. So I'll just pretend this is wool or not use it at all. Or this one's more 1830s, this one's more 1860s. You get to that point where you can do that. It is really, again, getting in there and studying the originals. And even if it's just online pictures, there's plenty of online dresses where you can get close-ups of the fabrics, and that will help you learn, especially those little nuances. Learn how each time period does florals differently, because yes, florals can be done differently. You can't just go, oh, there's a floral print and this is a floral print, I can use it. That is not how this works. Florals are done differently, the designs are done differently, the amount of detail in the florals are done differently. Sometimes the leaves or the type of floral, like the actual plant that they're trying to emulate, is more popular in certain time periods than others. It's just so many details. But yeah, I have actually known people who just say, oh, go find a floral cotton at Walmart or Joann's and that you like, and it'll be fine because they had florals back then. And no, that's not the case. There are tons of ways to do flowers and fabric, and not all of them can be dated to the 1840s. There are a ton of ways to do stripes and plaids, and not all of them are correct for the 1840s. Getting as close as you can to the detail is going to help train your eye. The full dress pictures are fantastic, and yes, they are so pretty, but you are missing a lot of detail when you look at just the full dress and not the close-up of the fabric, because a lot of those designs and the smaller details are missed when you look at the full dress and not at a close-up. Again, it may be very tempting to see a striped floral fabric of an 1840s dress and then go pick out a modern striped floral fabric without realizing that the florals are different shapes, dimensions, faced different ways, or the stripes aren't actually plain stripes but tiny little geometric designs to resemble stripes when put together. There's so much overwhelming detail that you have to take into consideration when picking a period print. And I know people who say, well, screw it, I can't tell what's right and wrong with the print, so I'm just going to stick with plaids and stripes, because those you can always get right. And that is not true either, unfortunately. Plaid and stripe dimensions, the thickness, the color schemes, the scale, all vary by time period. And there are incorrect plaids and stripes for the 1840s as well. I will say they are easier to get right, but you can't just pick any old plaid and stripe because, oh, it's going to be right. That is not the case, unfortunately. But again, the main thing is just to notice when you are looking and sorting originals, just to be aware of the fiber content, which I understand can be so hard because even museums are really bad about mislabeling period wool as cotton because it feels and looks like a cotton to them, and how much fiber plays a role in the fabric design. Even if you still are okay with using a cotton reproduction fabric in place of a period wool, it's just having that knowledge and being able to teach others about it is invaluable. So very quickly, were there other fibers? Actually, yes, there were. I have found 2 references to piña cloth, or cloth made from pineapple leaves. I own an antique length of Victorian piña cloth, so I have experienced in a very light and breathable plant-based fiber that looks and feels in ways about like a silk organza, but it's stiffer. It's a little bit stiffer than silk organza, and it's the drape is a little different. It's not as shiny as silk organza either, but it's very similar to silk organza. If I had to pick like the closest approximation to a piña cloth, it would be silk organza. It has a very lovely sheen to it. But I have not come across any 1840s dresses made from piña cloth. I have seen the references to how the cloth is made, but not actually seen any dresses made of piña cloth. A very good piña cloth is going to be a fine and delicate stuff, and that's very hard to get. Piña cloth is only made in the Philippines. And all the samples I have personally seen today, or personally handled, because there was some places selling it for a while, have been a lot coarser than period piña cloth. But I've also never been to the Philippines, so maybe they have the delicate stuff there. So before we leave fabrics, let's just put some things into practice. We're going to look at a few websites that sell reproduction cotton, and we're going to see if we can't find some good 1840s prints with what we've learned. The 1840s can be very hard to shop for because, as we discussed, the prints are so detailed and have so much dimension that most modern reproduction fabrics just simply do not have. They've been cleaned up to make it more appealing to modern buyers. We're going to start with 2B's Fabric, which is an online fabric shop located it's not actually a real store, it's an online store, but it's based in Texas, which is where I live. So there are 18 pages of Civil War reproduction fabrics, which I hate that term. Because yes, some of those fabrics are Civil War. Some of them are Regency, some are 1830s, some are 1880s, and some are 1890s. Fabric designers, just because you find an old quilt does not mean it dates to the Civil War. There's a lot more time periods than 1861 to 1865. Sometimes I think that fabric designers think that fabric design started in 1861, went to 1865, skipped all the way to 1930, and then we get modern prints after that. Because those are the only ones you'll find. You will find 1930s reproduction prints, you will find Civil War reproduction prints, and that is it. And most of those fabrics are not dated to the Civil War. It drives me nuts because I do a lot of Civil War stuff. And it's very frustrating to me because you have people who think they're doing a good job by going and buying a Civil War reproduction fabric when that fabric is really 1880s. And that can be very frustrating for people who think they're doing a good job, but also it's frustrating for me because now I have to explain that no, the fabric designer is not very good at dating fabrics. They do not have usually a degree in dating fabrics. They don't know what they're doing. They just found an old quilt and it looks Civil War, so they're going to call it that. Also, just because you have a quilt dated to the 1860s does not mean that all the fabrics are 1860s. Some of those prints may be far back as the 1820s. It just depends on if the lady was quilting for fun and bought new fabric for her quilt, or was using scraps that she's accumulated throughout her entire life, or possibly grabbed from her mother, who could have been living a longer time. A quilt made in 1862 may have fabric from 1862, it may have fabrics from 1858, or 1851, or 1843, or 1837, or even 1825 for all we know. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox and we'll look at the pretty fabrics. Like these. The only thing is, you open them up. When you see little swatches like this is 6-inch squares, which means there's 1, 2, 3, 4. Each one of those little motifs is about 1.5 inches, so that's much too small of a scale for the 1840s for women's stuff, unfortunately. So let's go back over here. I do like the busyness of that. Anyway, a good 1850s children's stuff. Ooh, this is interesting. Let's see. Let's do the blue one. I like that contrast. There's like something even in the background, and there's dots. The motifs themselves are unfortunately giving me 1880s, 1890s vibes. Not a huge fan of the florals. They're a little bit too one-dimensional for 1840s. And I feel like the stripe itself, I would like this a lot better if this blue thing was about as wide as this, if that makes sense. I think that would be more to scale for the 1840s. I would say that's plausible. What is this? Of course, it's Andover. Andover tends to do really good, busier prints. I'm not a fan of how they're doing the leaves there. That's too small of scale. It actually looks similar to a wool print, but I have seen this. It's a little cleaner, but I do like the geometric stripes. I just wish this black stripe was as thick as the red bit. But it has in 3 colors. I'd say that's definitely plausible. I'm gonna keep it up there. Ooh, I like this. Okay, I like this one better because it has more contrast than these two because it has more colors in it. And look at that ombre background. Okay. Now that's an 1840s print. It has the serpentine, it has the coral, it has dots, it has ombre, it has tons of detail. That right there is an 1840s print. I like it. It has in 3 colors. I do like this one the best because it has more color to it, which we saw a lot in the originals. I don't like these because they're going, you can see the coral is going horizontal, and I've only ever seen them go vertical on originals. It's also more of a mid 1830s print. It's plausible for early 40s. But if you can find the one that's going up and down and not sideways, that's way better. Use this for 40s if I was doing children's clothes. This is too small a scale to use for adult stuff. But I like the dots inside the flowers. I like how they're going different directions. I like the dots everywhere. There's not a lot of just random plain background. It's filled in pretty nicely. I'd use this for kids stuff. Probably not for adult stuff. You can use that for a wrapper recently. That one actually was the great version of this, and then I used this as the background. With that, I would like it better if it was yellow, and I don't like the fact that they're modern looking hearts in there, so never mind. This might be doable. I like that there's stuff in the background. Florals look good. I wish they were bigger and further apart. To it, but I like the stripes and I like the lightning effect. If the stripes were a totally different color, I would say likely yes. As is, I think it's a little too one-dimensional. This one's halfway decent. I don't particularly care for the florals and the scale's too small. Hey, look, there is the serpentine print I was talking about. The one that goes vertical. This is nice. The green is a really ugly puke green, though. I would not use that for a dress, unless you're going for olivey puke color. Purple's nice. I've seen that in person. It also comes in pink, and the pink one's nice too. All bits were bigger. I could totally see this as a option for this. Saw earlier, as is, I think those florals are a little too small. I just wish that there weren't all these and that the background had something because I think that's a good scale. Ooh, what's this? I have not looked at these reproduction fabrics in a long time, so this is nice. I like that. Look at that detail. Stripes are too small though. Maybe for something smaller. Maybe for kid stuff. Maybe for a bonnet. I wouldn't use it for a dress though. That's too small, but I like that detail. I hate when they make the prints too small. I understand that they're doing it because when you're quilting, you're often dealing with very small pieces and you want to get the design in there. But look at that. Look at stripes and then that and then the florals that are actually really decent. If that was at a much larger scale, that would be perfect. Civil War fabrics and you get things like this. Like, I don't think that's right. It's an older pattern. I wish the background had dots. I really do, and then I think it would be fine. Would I still use it? Probably, because we don't have a lot of options for 1840s. So actually, I'm gonna keep that one. Do I like which one better? I think I like the red one better. What is this? I can already tell the background's off. Yeah, they're doing that linen look background. I really like this floral though. If you did something different with the background, take that floral and made it further apart. I think that'd be great. Oh, it's a Moda. That's why. Okay, Moda does weird things with their backgrounds. They often have the best prints. Time, like a tween age. I think that'd be fine. That is so nice. Like the florals themselves and the background's nice too. It's too close together and I don't like how random it looks. Hey, we already saw that one. That's just in green. I might like that better if the background had something and they were further apart. Which one do I like better? Let's go this way. Hey, this actually looks really close to that one bowl I was thinking about. I need to pull that one too. I like that. Ombre stripes. I do with the stripe. I do wish the stripes were a little bit wider. What will be original I'm thinking about? I just saw it. I know it's here because I just went through all these fabrics. That's not the one I'm thinking about. Ah, this is the one I'm thinking about. I don't have a closer picture and this sold for a while ago. Yeah, the scale's still too small. But like look at the leaves and they're even shaped the same way in terms of their movement. They're about the same distance apart. I just need something else in that background. I might still use that. I might. Recently did this for a client for 1830s. The scale's actually not half that bad. I was worried about being too small. Could be better, but it's pretty good. I would use that for early 40s. If I was doing early 40s, I think that'd still be okay. Oh, that's that's fun. I'd use that for 40s. I'd use it for late 30s too, and early 40s. Like the first half of the 40s. Yeah. What is this? I don't like those designs. Motifs are weird. Wish the scale was bigger. This is, I'm gonna go with no. I like the background. Just I wish there was more dimension in the color. It's too small of a scale. Again, you gotta remember each one of these swatches is usually 6 inches unless they show you otherwise. I'd use that for 40s. It's a nice stripe with dots on it. I'd use that. We're like halfway through. This is gonna take longer than I thought it was going to. Oh, I wish those were further apart. Oh. It had more dimension. Obviously, I wish they had more dimension and not just all just varying shades of red. But I like the flowers and stuff. I just wish they were further apart and not all the same color. It has that hatched background. Ugh, why do they do that? Haha. That is an 1840s print. Look at that. Look at all the detail. Stripe made out of geometrics. Background. I love that. That is an 1840s gown. That is fantastic. How many yards? Oh, they only have 3 yards. Ugh. Totally about to buy that for an 1840s dress for my own. That is awesome. I need a nice 1840s dress, and I think that would be perfect. Oh, I'd use that. Background's good. I like the florals. I do wish these transparent ones weren't there because that would really set the scale. But I'd probably still use it. This is what Moda usually does, is the molted background. See how some of it's darker, some of it's lighter? That's something you find on older fabrics as they get dirty and they just reproduce it. So you find that a lot, even though it wasn't originally a thing. So some Moda prints are perfect, and then they do that molted background, and it takes it out. Molted background again. That one's a little bit more pronounced. Those are too close together, but I like that color contrast. 4313. Ah, that's it. That's it. Okay. Nope, that's the only bag. Okay. Yeah, that one is 7 inches. Sometimes it's just really hard to tell. Some places will show you like a picture of the bolt and you can get like a better idea. This probably would not be my first choice. Fabulous. Not my color scheme, but it's fabulous. Someone needs an 1840s dress out of this. Mid to late 40s. It'd be fantastic. Probably not my first choice, but I would use that one. Definitely not my first choice, but it's doable. Especially if made up as a wool. I like this one the best, and I like this one the best. Now we're going to go through the 8 pages of Quilted Twins and see if they have any good 1840s prints. All right, so here we have Quilted Twins. I'm not expecting to see as much on this one. There's also less fabric to go through. 19th century florals, and I like the leopard print background. I'd use that for kids stuff. There's only 1 yard left. Ugh. I like the contrast with the brown. I would choose this one first. Okay, this one I would use for early 40s. A long time ago, I found an original that was almost the exact fabric, and I did not save the image of it, and I'm still kicking myself for that. This comes in different colorways. There's a green one like this, but it's this fabric, and there's a brown one, and I think a purple one too. But both of these I would use for early 40s. It doesn't have the usual 6-inch swatch, I can't tell, but just given how many threads I can see, I'm betting those stripes are about 1 inch. That's gonna be too small. That palmetto pink one, just with more contrast, which is not a bad thing. So it's like serpentine coral with the I don't know if it's still too small. That one might be doable. It probably wouldn't be my first choice, but I think that's doable. Is there a better image of the color? I think it's just too plain. This, on the other hand, I don't know how that would look as a full dress, but I kind of like it. Yeah, I think that's it. So we found some good prints. We went through all those. I wish I had more contrast, but I would use that. Fabulous. That one's a good one. That one's a good one. That one's but I would use it. Something striking me as right about this. I don't know. I don't know how that would turn out in a full dress. I find the best thing to do if you do multiple time periods, especially, this is what really helped me when I first started 1830s. I kept getting distracted with 1860s prints when I was trying to look for 1830s prints. and just kept me from noticing the more 1830s ones because my eye went straight to the 1860s. So what I personally found helpful for me is just saturating myself with originals, say 25 to 50 pictures of close-up fabrics dating within 2 to 3 years of what I was doing. So I was doing 1835. So I would pick 1833 to 1835 dresses in my fiber, so cotton. I also did look at some wools because, again, period wools are very close to period cottons. And I'm 95% sure that most of the Met dresses that are dated to the 1830s that say they're cotton, I don't think they're cotton. I think they're wool. Can I prove it? No. But I look at those things and how they're draped, I look at the sheen, and I look at the designs going, that's a printed wool. I know it's a printed wool. I just can't prove it. The Met's really bad about misdating and mislabeling things. Really, really bad. Anyway, so I picked a whole bunch of dresses that were like 1833 to 1835, got close at small that fabric, and just like saturated myself over and over and over, looking at the images, looking at the images, looking at the images. And then after about an hour, I went back to the reproduction things, and my brain was retrained to look for 1830s print designs. And I found, the first time I went through 2Bs, I think I found maybe one print and I didn't really care for it. So after I went back and saturated myself with originals, I found 10 more on the same website on the same day because my brain was trained now to look for the right things. And the reason it's important to not just do 1830s prints or even 1840s prints, there's a lot of difference in 1840 fabrics and 1849 fabrics because fabric designs do change. And this is not a time period where you generally hoard fabric like we do today. Like, they don't generally just buy a dress length of fabric back in the 1840s and keep it for 10 years and then decide to make something with it. You needed a new dress, so you went to the store and bought a length of fabric that was essentially brand new, and then you brought it home. Or you went to the second-hand shop and then bought a dress and you took it in and refitted it to yourself. That's how things worked back then. It wasn't... The odds of a lady actually purchasing a fabric with fabric 10 years out of date, pretty rare. Silks and wools, a little bit more common because they were going to last longer than cotton and linen will. Actually, in the 1840s, is a really big thing. Late 1830s, early 1840s. I've noticed a lot of dresses using 18th century fabrics, like 18th century silk dresses that were remade over in the late 1830s and early 1840s. It was like a fad or something because I see so many of them. It's weird to me, but it's also kind of cool. So there are those little outliers, but most of the time we're not buying fabric and letting it sit in the 1840s. So we need to get pretty specific about what type of fabric we're wanting for our reproduction dresses. Anyway, that's kind of what helped me. So before we go, I want to touch on accessories, shawls, and mantles and such. You will see shawls and mantles both in silk and wool. And in mantles, I've also seen them in velvet. For those of you who have not had the opportunity to handle mid-19th century original velvet, take it from someone who has. Period velvet is going to be a lot more similar to a modern velveteen, so cotton velveteen, than the polyester or rayon velvet. So what we call velvet, the pile is thicker, is slinkier, and the fuzzy part, the pile, again, it's going to be higher in modern fabrics and it's going to be lower in period fabrics. So it's not quite as plushy back then, if that makes sense. So typically I use a cotton velveteen anytime I'm doing anything that calls for period velvet because it has a similar feel and a similar pile length to period cotton velvet. Now I have in the past used modern silk velvet, which is usually not pure silk. It's a silk pile with a rayon background, for cost purposes. And that's fine. It's a bit slinky and it doesn't have the structure of period silk velvet, and also again the pile's a little bit higher. But silk velvet has a very different feel than cotton velvet, and so there's a big feel difference that I felt was necessary for that particular project. But generally, if I can get away with it, I'm using cotton velveteen, which is, again, a very close approximation to period velvet. If you're looking to recover a period 1840s parasol, brown and green are going to be extremely popular parasol colors. Although I do have some fantastic brocaded shot silks in my collection of original parasols. Most often in the 1840s, there will be no trim, although later in the decade, fringe does come into popularity. For the majority of the 1840s, you're going to see very long finials in the 1840s, and I found that most 1840s parasols are not lined. A few of them are, but most of them are not. For bonnet ribbons, which I guess I'll count as fabric, so we'll go over it here, I've noticed 2 to 4 inch wide ribbons in solids or varying colors, and either to match the bonnet or to contrast. I've seen plaids and patterns, I've seen stripes or ombre. For dress accessories such as cuffs, collars, and chemisettes, you're looking for a bleached white cotton or linen that is very fine. So think like handkerchief linen or cotton voile or cotton lawn, somewhere in there. Sheer or semi-sheer and very delicate. For sunbonnets, you're going to see the smaller prints that are more common in children's garments than adult clothing. But with a smaller scale of bonnet as opposed to dress, that does make sense. And I have seen a couple of solid colored silk sunbonnets, not cotton ones, silk sunbonnets. And yes, sunbonnets can be made of silk. That was a thing. We tend to equate sunbonnets with poor people, which yes, poor people wore sunbonnets. But also, anyone who really want to protect themselves from the sun, because the sunbonnets can do the best job at that, they're going to be wearing sunbonnet too. So yes, you see the ones that are very fine, made of very fine sheer fabrics. It can be a very nice dressy sunbonnet. You can also see them in silk. And I wish I had more for you just to practice your eye, but I only found a few period swatch books, one from 1843, and it had already sold, so I only got 3 pictures from it. But again, with swatch books, they're just collection of fabric, which may or may not be appropriate for a dress or any other project. It may be quilting fabrics. They may be for children's clothing. You don't know because there's no context behind it. It's just literally a book of swatches. So you also have to know what makes up dress goods before you start looking at swatch books and starting to use that to figure out what's good for a dress. I found another 1840 swatch book from the Met. Most of these do appear to me to be dress goods, and a few of them are definitely not dress goods. A few others, and now call for help. So those of you who have looked into the 1840s longer than I, do you have a secret stash of dozens of 1840s dresses that are available for us to look at fabric-wise, especially with close-ups? Please educate me and the others in the comments and try to help us out with any type of compilation that you have. I'll compile any information given and I'll put it in a pinned comment at the bottom, or sorry, at the top of the comments for everyone. Of course, giving credit to all you lovely folks who are helping us out. Next month in our Bettering Your Impression series, we're going to touch on how to pick patterns, so sewing patterns, and how to draft our own patterns for the 1840s. We're going to go through all the layers from chemises and corsets all the way up through dresses and mantles, and also touch on bonnets and all the things so that you can learn exactly what you need to do to either buy a pattern or draft your own. Some of them we're going to go definitely for buying because I'm not the best at creating millinery patterns, but there are people who are, so I will just direct you to them. But for like dresses and such, I'm going to give you the option of here's how to make your own, but also here's a pattern if you don't feel comfortable with that. If you've enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe to the channel, click that little bell notification so you're notified anytime I upload a new video, and as always, have a fantastic week. I'll see you back here in the next video.